quorum.
Okay, we're going to start this evening's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join the commission. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Cookie, could we do roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Nunez is absent and excused. Commissioner Robbins?
Here.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Present?
Commissioner Reyes is absent and excused. And Commissioner St. Clair?
Present.
I think you may have to slide down. I think you're using my microphone. There you go. Loud enough, but still.
Okay. Alrighty, so the first item on tonight's agenda is our consent calendar. And we're going to review or discuss the minute meetings from the September 11th, 2019 meeting. Commissioner, is there any questions, comments, edits you would do to the minute meetings?
I make a recommendation that we approve the consent calendar for last month.
All right,
Accept it.
That?
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. The September 11th, 2019 meeting minutes are approved. Okay, moving on to public comment. And this is an opportunity for anyone in the public to bring to the commission's attention any item that is not on the agenda. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, all righty, thank you. Moving into new business, we've got two items, and we're going to open up with solid waste, an update on the solid waste and rate notification. And with that, Roxanne, please.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the commission. I'm Roxanne Murray, and I'm a member of the Public Works team. And tonight we're here to give you an update, as the Vice Chair just mentioned, about the solid waste rates for 2020. At the September 16th study session of the City Council, they gave consent to mail a public notice regarding the proposed rate increase for 2020 of 4%. The notice was sent on the 25th. It notified all property owners and solid waste ratepayers of the intent to increase the rates to not to exceed 4%. It was mailed on the 25th, and I can assure you that I've already received several calls regarding it, and each one has had a positive outcome, so I'm pretty happy about that. Just to give you a little background, I think most of you know, but just to update, Recology provides the collection services for the city. The contract or the agreement is with the city. This contract, the original contract, ended in 2020, and it was extended by the council last year for 15 years, so beginning in 2021, the extension will go to 2035. South Bay Recycling, or SBR, provides the services at the Shoreway Environmental Center, and they do the processing and disposal. The City of San Mateo is one of 12 member agencies of the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, or SBWMA, and as such, we're one of the primary owners of the Shoreway Environmental Center. And the agreement with South Bay Recycling was also for 10 years, but that was with the authority, not with the individual city or jurisdictions. And that also was a 10-year agreement ending in 2020, but built into that contract were 3 one-year extensions. And at the last SBWMA meeting, they exercised their rights to extend the options. So there's 3 main factors in the solid waste review. It's the cost of collection, the cost of disposal, and the city fees that are associated with solid waste. The city fees include the city franchise fee, the solid waste reduction program, capital improvements, and the landfill closure fee, and the rate stabilization fund, which was created in 2018 by the City Council. The city franchise fee is 4%. It's the net cost of revenues. There's no change in that. It's been the same for the last 15, 20 years. The landfill closure fee is a fixed fee of $600,000, and that covers the cost of the maintenance of the 3rd Avenue, the landfill closure at 3rd Avenue that's now Ryder Park, and the maintenance required for that, and the debt covenant. The solid waste weight program is, which is, I have an active part in, and that's for preventing the cost of the city's waste diversion efforts. That includes waste diversion, street sweeping, litter abatement, and any regulatory requirements. There's also a $750,000 fixed fee in that, and that's to fund the capital improvement basically related to like the capture devices and for compliance to the municipal regional plan or the MRP. And grateful to our city council, in 2018, they established a rate stabilization fund, knowing that the contract with the Recology would either be extended or we would have to go out to bid, and knowing that there would be rate increases related to that extension. The cost of labor was never negotiated. It was a fixed contract, so Recology recovered everything was fixed. It was only based basically on CPI. So we know that there's going to be adjustments in the cost of labor. We knew there's going to be adjustments in the cost of services. And so we know the initial cost will be anywhere between 8 to 10.8%. Also, I'm going to kind of brag for the moment. We've seen in the city a huge reduction in illegal dumping. But a side effect of that is a huge increase in the amount of people calling up for their twice-yearly cleanups. So they're taking advantage of that versus dumping on the street. We need to expand those routes. There's a ceiling on that, so it looks like we need to add another route onto that, and there'll be a cost associated with that. With the new contract or agreement, they're allowed fuel adjustments. CPI will now be based on Bay Area index versus a national index, which is definitely going to be a cost factor. There's also some really exciting stuff going on at the Shoreway Environmental Center related to capital improvement projects, and we will bear some of those costs. We have, again, the MRP. We don't know the new conditions. We do know what can and can't go down a storm drain, and there's going to be more and more regulations, and that we can't have anything going down, so we have to consider regulatory compliance measures. Because we're going to be collecting more and more organics, and will not hopefully be going to the landfill, but will be processed at the Shore Environmental Center. There's conditions from the Bay Area Quality Management District that we're going, about a $2 million improvement that's going to have to take place within the next 6 months at the Shore Center. And the big one is SB 1383, which says by, and we'll go into that a little bit, but it becomes effective January 1st, 2020. The state has not decided all the requirements yet. They're still in the deciding phase. We should know more by the end of November. But it's going to have a definite effect on our programs here. It's going to require enforcement, and measurement will be done by programs versus actual measurement of what's going into the landfill. This just gives you a little breakdown of what the costs are, the cost of service. I wanted to show you what it was like last year, what we anticipate for 2020, and looking forward. We know those costs are going up. These are what we know, pretty much. What we don't know are the unknowns. And that's what the rate stabilization factor has been built in, because we didn't have a fund before. At one point, we were almost $4 million in debt related to our solid waste program, and we had a 19.9% rate increase in 2010 and 2011, and we don't ever want to do that to our ratepayers again. So although the revenues coming in are anticipated next year are sufficient to cover the cost of the program, we know there's going to be, these are the known costs for 2021. It doesn't show the unknown cost, and we want to just make sure we're not caught with our pants down again, that we always are building for the future. And that was the goal of the Rate Stabilization Fund. So just to give you a heads up, the notice again was mailed on the 25th. It goes to all taxpayers and ecology ratepayers. The notice told you what the rate increase was for and how to protest a rate. The public hearing will be November 18th. At that time, we'll count all the protests. If there is not a majority protest, it will go before a vote before the council. If the council chooses to approve the 4% increase, it would become effective January 1st of 2020. And that's my story.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Yep. So, Cookie, do we have, is any speaker slips for this item?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. So what we'll do is, in terms of the commission, if people have got, if commissioners have questions or updates or comments for Roxanne, we'll just kind of do it all in one phase. Commissioner Sinclair?
Thank you very much for your report. It's one of those things where we're better that we have it locked in at 4%, correct, than have it be adjusted yearly and have to take the chance on it getting worse, because we all know it just keeps going up, up, up. The one question I have is, with the recyclable programs and stuff, do we get much complaints from citizens? Because years ago, we had certain neighborhoods that had the smaller apartment complexes that when they changed their garbage cans or they didn't want to have the trucks going inside of the property and they had to move them, that was one of the biggest uproars because their amounts went up so dramatically. Do we still have any of that complaints coming in, or has that been kind of gone to the wayside?
I haven't received any complaints since the beginning of when the change took place, which was in 2011. We pretty much have been able to work with Recology and with the property owners because they still are allowed 50 feet that they'll go back and get those, and there's no charge. So once it goes beyond 50 feet is when the price incurred, or depending on an incline. Pretty fortunate we've been able to work with the property management teams, our staff, and Recology, and I think we pretty much, I mean, there are definitely some folks that are paying those fees, where before every ratepayer paid for those, it was kind of a built-in cost, where it seemed it's a elected service, and it shouldn't be everybody paying for those services. So I think I haven't had any complaints, I'm gonna say honestly, in at least the last 8 years.
Another question is, with the recyclable issues coming up where we've had to have, like in sustainability, looked at it because they want it cleaner and cleaner, and it's almost unfeasible to get it to that clean. And the amount of recyclable isn't being paid for anymore, and you're seeing recyclable places shut down and not doing picked up. Is that a cost that we're looking at or that's gonna change our numbers?
It's already been built in. We took that hit pretty much last year, and the Waste Authority just purchased, it's a multi-million-dollar equipment to do even an optical sorting. So the quality of our materials that are going to be sorted going forward will even be a more pristine. It won't probably ever be virgin material, but it's going to be pretty darn clean. And fortunately, SBR, South Bay Recycling, who's doing our processing, has done an excellent job. So all the material that can be recycled is being recycled. Nothing is being sent overseas and dumped. It's actually it's a quantity in demand because we're doing such extensive hand sorting right now, but the optical sorting will even push it that much up because we kind of have to stay ahead of the game because there's so many people competing for the same markets that we need to stay above the grade. So they've already taken those precautions and the equipment's there right now in the process of being installed. Hopefully, we were talking about it earlier, at the beginning of next year, we would like to ask the SBWMA, or South Bayside Waste Management Authority, Joe Mariano, the director, to actually give a short presentation about the improvements that are being done down there on behalf of the ratepayers.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great presentation. I'm just curious, I can't recall, so how the rate stabilization fund is funded. I understand if there's a surplus, but I can't see we're going to have a surplus.
It is a surplus. More revenue will be coming in than the cost of actual services and the city fees. Everything the surplus basically is built into that rate stabilization fund, and it will be used specifically for waste reduction and waste diversion projects. So anytime there's a one-time cost, it'll be there. We're also looking, and Commissioner Rowinski asked about earlier, our services are pretty reasonable. In fact, we're probably not, for the smaller cans, not covering the actual cost of collection. So we're working with, we've just recently in the beginning steps of working with HF&H, a consulting firm that specializes in this, to come up with a more equitable way to charge for the services, or maybe a better way. If we're going to zero waste, and right now we're basing all of our costs on the size of the garbage can, it doesn't make sense to base when we're going to the smaller, reducing services, but actually having more service, we have to figure out how to equitably charge for the services. And so there probably will be some change in how we pay the rates. There's got to be a better way or a more equitable way for those services. So they're going to be studying, they actually created this progressive rate structure that we currently have, and we've had for the past 15 years, which did a great job. It did promote recycling, it did promote putting things in your green container. But how do we now, going forward, charge correctly for the services that are being offered? We have 3 trucks with Teamster drivers coming to your home. How do we equitably charge for those services? And the rate stabilization fund will give us, will help to offset some of those costs, so it won't be a huge burden. Initially, we can gradually, incrementally, over maybe 5 or 6 years, increase the cost of services and balance those out.
It's a separate issue, but a very important one that you're talking about is, how to make those that get the benefit pay the burden done in an equitable way. But I just want to make sure I understand. So in the rates that are proposed with the 4% bump, there is a contribution to the
There's a
fund.
line item that's rate stabilization, and that will go directly into that fund.
And what is that expected to generate? About $1 million?
I think about $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I may, through the chair, if you look on your packet on page 13 of 28, there's a table there. So the rate stabilization fund at the end of this year will be 1.5 million, and then an additional after the end of next year, 2020, will be just over $1 million. So at the end of next year, we anticipate that to be $2.5 million.
And that's a line item that comes in on a monthly revenue basis to the city.
Thank you. Okay.
Just a couple of questions. Actually, while we're on this slide, there's no rate stabilization fund forecast for 2021, and is there a reason for that?
I think we'll probably be looking at the actual revenues that come in. Hopefully there'll be no shortfalls, or there no, something happens that we don't know. Again, we would probably, if we look at, again, a 4% rate increase next year, that a rate stabilization fund would be built into that.
Right, okay, so this is basically a 2-year forecast.
Because again, we don't know all the costs. This is
Right.
what we know.
Right,
This doesn't cover the unknowns.
okay, all righty. I have a question here, Roxanne. On Table D, on the agenda packet information, San Mateo's rates are really, really low relative to other cities within the authority's jurisdiction. Why is that?
Well, we also, because it's a progressive rate structure currently, so basically you pay less per gallon. The less garbage you generate, the less you pay per gallon. So if you have a 20 or a 32 gallon can, and I could just be making this number off the top of my head, say you pay $1 per gallon. If you generate 96 gallons, you might pay $1.25 a gallon. So it increases by the more you generate. And we have a large commercial sector that generates, or we have complexes that generate large amount of waste. So they're paying a greater amount per gallon for the cost. So we need to, it was incentivized by the council you would pay less the less you generated.
Right, so essentially what you're saying is the residents in San Mateo, and this, I think, this is residential, so Table D is residential. So is it fair to say that the residents in San Mateo are doing a very good job of composting and recycling relative to other cities within the authority's jurisdiction? Okay.
And we're the biggest jurisdiction. San Mateo is a little bit larger than Redwood City, so we have a much more larger pool to pull from versus, say, Atherton or Hillsdale, which just is basically all residential.
Right.
But Roxanne hasn't met her goal yet of being lower than Foster City.
But Foster City has lower costs for service. They're flat and they're right next to the transfer station.
Oh, okay, there you go.
We have some hills. We
Right.
have a few challenges.
Okay, one last question here. You had mentioned in your presentation that there was a need for South Bay Recycling to add routes to do the twice annual pickup. When you say routes, is that that's obviously within the city of San Mateo?
It's jurisdiction-wide.
Okay.
But, and it's Recology that's actually being, because they're performing that collection service for us.
Right.
But we've seen almost a 50%, in the last 5 years, a 50% reduction in illegal dumping. They also provide the illegal dumping service, and they provide the twice-yearly cleanup service. So although we've seen in our city a huge reduction in illegal dumping, we still have some, but we've seen a huge reduction. But we've also, on the other side, seen the routes. I think we've seen a reduction of 50% there, but we've seen a 60% increase in our residents calling for their twice-yearly cleanup. In other jurisdictions, they've seen an increase in the twice-yearly pickup, but they've also seen an increase in illegal dumping. So they will be adding an extension route. I think right now it's 170 calls per day that they can take. Once they go over that ceiling, they have to add a second route, or you would be delayed in the pickup. Right now it's within 1 week of request. It would have to go out to 2 weeks because it would take longer to process a request coming in.
Right.
But if we add that secondary route, and again, we're one of the largest jurisdictions, so we will be picking up a good portion of that cost. And again, it's an unknown.
Right, so the pickup is done when you exceed a certain call level, and adding a second route is basically adding a second set of drivers.
I think currently there's 3 routes, so it'd be adding a 4th route. So it'd be
Okay.
adding an additional route to what exists now.
Okay,
To
so they would be.
accommodate the overflow.
Right, and when you define a route, it's not like a street, it's actually a set of staff or employees going through and
Right.
doing more pickup.
It's 2 drivers on a truck going to pick up. And we've done a really good job internally within the city, so any call that's reported to us, we go out and investigate that day. We then, at the end of each day, either our staff picks it up 90% of the time, Recology's route will go out and pick it up the next day. So we're picking up any illegal dumping that's not the responsibility of the property owners within 24 hours of being notified.
Right, and that, I think, is Public Works Enforcement. Right, okay, great. If there's no other questions, comments from the public, we can move to our second item, which is an update on the Neighborhood Traffic Action Plan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing like solid waste to bring in the crowd. Maybe not.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me. My name is Bethany Lopez. I'm the Senior Engineer overseeing traffic for the Public Works Department. I'm here tonight to talk about the traffic action plans and provide an update for the program. First, however, I wanted to provide a few updates about the previous item that we discussed I believe it was last month, for the Bay Meadows traffic action plan. So we were able to get some flashing beacons installed out at Franklin and Bays. We heard from the community that that was a high priority item. And so we had some flashing beacons in stock. And so we were able to get those out right away. We are also working with Parks and Rec to improve the visibility at the intersection. There's a couple trees that might pose some visibility concerns. And so we're working with them to get those addressed. We're also looking into some of the warning signage that's out there to make sure that it's sufficient for both the pedestrian crossing and for the curves in the roadways. So we will be looking at getting that updated very quickly as well, and continuing to coordinate with the steering committee in the neighborhood on some speeding concerns that we've heard about, And also just provide an update about the event center parking that was also brought up and that will be pursued further following the UFIS project completion. Now, to get into the traffic action plan, I just wanted to go over the timeline really quickly. In late 2015, City Council directed staff to look into an outreach program or develop an outreach program to meet with residents throughout the city and develop ways to address those concerns. Staff developed that program and held what was called the Traffic Forums in early 2016, and that was a series of 10 meetings throughout the city that covered all neighborhoods. And I believe those were completed in early 2016. Following that, staff began drafting the traffic action plan reports for 12 interested neighborhoods. We presented those reports at the Public Works Commission at the time in early 2017, and shortly thereafter began implementation of some of the recommendations in those reports. More recently, we presented the Bay Meadows Traffic Action Plan. We are continuing the TAP development process with the Sugarloaf neighborhood, and we are still working on addressing some of the items here. So of the total traffic action plan recommendations that came out of the original 12 reports, there was about 254 individual items that needed to be addressed. Of those, 42 of them were police items, and I apologize, I wanted to acknowledge that Sergeant Shannon Hagan is here to represent police. So of those 42 items, like I said, they were police items, and a majority of those, nearly all of those have been complete to date. The remaining 212 items are public works items, and if you can see in the graph on the chart on the right, those represent the status of the public works items remaining. So about half of them have been completed, about a quarter of them are either in progress or ongoing efforts, and a quarter of them have yet to be begun. So some of the first things that we worked on, you might recall back in 2017, was getting some infrastructure improvements completed. We installed some flashing beacons at 15 crosswalks, and we have since installed quite a few more. We installed speed cushions on 3 main roadways, and again, we've installed quite a few more since then, and installed permanent speed feedback signs. In 2018, we completed some school signage enhancements, and those were near some of the North Shoreview Montessori School and Hillsdale schools. We also completed a citywide signing and striping program, which addressed about 45 of the traffic action plan items. You might notice on the bottom right, one of those improvements was some striping improvements that we completed on Norfolk between 2nd and 3rd. That was a priority for the North Shoreview neighborhood. In 2019, we completed the Hillsdale and Saratoga crosswalk relocation, relocating that crosswalk from the east side of the Hillsdale-Saratoga intersection to the west side of the intersection. We are also going to be starting the second phase of that fairly shortly, which will provide some signal improvements and also some pedestrian safety improvements. Overall, we've completed over $300,000 in infrastructure projects. We're also continuing to work on some ongoing projects. One of those main projects is the radar trailer deployment, which police oversees. They have 2 dedicated radar trailers that can be moved to various locations, and those 2 dedicated trailers are specifically for traffic action plan requests. We have 1 more radar trailer that police uses for hotspots, speeding hotspots, and those are usually per request. We also have worked with a number of schools, including Abbott Middle School, Hillsdale High School, North Shoreview Montessori, Sunnybrae Elementary, Baywood Elementary, and San Mateo High School. And we've collected some of the follow-up data, but we are still in the process of doing that. We've collected maybe about 25% of the follow-up data that's needed, and we expect to complete the majority of that by spring 2020. We're also continuing to work with the neighborhood steering committees. A couple of those main ones are the North Shoreview neighborhood, where we're working with them continuously to address cut-through traffic, working with the Hillsdale neighborhood to provide some traffic calming prior to the grade separation roadways opening, and also with Fiesta Gardens on a lot of the severe congestion that's going on around their neighborhood. We've also pursued funding for some of the large traffic action plan items that required additional funding beyond the funding that was specified through Measure S. So we've made capital improvement program requests for funding, and we've also pursued some grant funding. So a couple of those are listed up here, such as the 19th Avenue Fashion Island Boulevard corridor study, which we will be kicking off this month. The Delaware curb extensions for the central neighborhood will be, I believe they're out to bid right now, and we'll be starting construction shortly. And as you can see, the 31st Avenue and 28th Avenue are both Hillsdale projects. The Bike Boulevard project is a grant-funded project. And then also continuing to work on some of our other projects. So the Hillsdale corridor improvements to optimize the progression through there, as well as some north central pedestrian improvements, which is funded by a community development block grant. Some of the next steps for this are to fold the Bay Meadows traffic action plan projects into the implementation plan for the remaining items. I think one of our main priorities is to get some of the signing and striping improvements completed as quickly as possible. So one of those will include some loading zone identification locations at the Bay Meadows Park, and also working on getting an additional flashing beacon at the park crosswalk. We're also, as I mentioned, working on drafting the Sugarloaf Traffic Action Plan. We'll be bringing that back to you in a couple months. We're also working on continuing to pursue funding for the remaining larger traffic action plan items, and that would be both CIP and grant funding, and then continuing to work with the steering committees to address their concerns. That's the end of my presentation, if you have any questions.
Great. And thank you, Bethany, for a great presentation and overseeing this program. Great job. Cookie, do we have any speaker slips?
No, I don't.
We don't. Okay. Oh, Lori. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Thanks, Matt.
Just so you know.
Okay, please, Lori, and then what we'll do as commissioners, we'll do questions and any comments, since this is an update for Bethany. We'll kind of combine that. Okay, thanks.
Lori Watanuki. Good evening, commissioners. I just wanted to make a comment on the speed humps on El Dorado and Fremont. They've worked out really well. But Grant Street now feels that traffic has redirected to their street, and residents are concerned with the high accident numbers at 4th and Grant intersection. If there are any other extra flashing beacons, 4th and Grant would be an excellent location since the accident numbers are just so high. Now, on September the 5th, we gave Officer Earnshaw a list of TAP issues, which he will share with the area police officer. One other comment that I had on the speed humps, if in the future you can put smaller signs in the neighborhoods, that would be great. Things, so it's oriented more towards the neighborhood. The signs are rather large, so smaller signs would be great. We would just like to know where we are with the electrical plans for our green pedestrian street light plan. Also, we would like to emphasize that more automated technological means are necessary, such as speed, feedback, signs, as police resources get reallocated to other areas. The traffic impacts continue, and I think we have to look towards new technology. Is there any way we can increase the funding and get more grants for more traffic calming measures, since there are a number of pending projects, especially for Baywood and the central neighborhood. Are the traffic impact fees currently sufficient for residential protection? Also, maybe outsourcing more of these projects. We thank staff, as always, for listening to our concerns. We appreciate the great assistance that they've given us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. Commissioner Robbins, any questions,
Yes.
comments?
One question. My comment is thank you. My question, it's not strictly a TAP matter, so if you want to defer, that's fine. But quite a while ago, we were told there was some talk about changing the emergency road ingress and egress designation and the limits that come with that. There are certain streets where you can't do anything on them other than something like a sign on the side. And it's been a year or more, I thought, when there was some discussion with police and fire, and I think of changing that so instead of the entire road, it would be some distance from the emergency facility, and that would allow some calming efforts that aren't currently allowed to happen on those streets. And I'll relate it to TAP in that one of the neighborhoods that is not really included in a TAP, and it's their own fault they didn't show up, but it's my neighborhood, San Mateo Park, and Burial Lane and Poplar are two streets that, particularly Burial Lane, and full disclosure, right in front of my house, where people zip up and down, and we've struggled with getting any effort there. And I know it's throughout the city this happens because that street is designated, I'm not using the right term, but emergency ingress and egress. Keep the people in Hillsborough happy maybe, but is there anything you can tell us about that, Bethany?
Sure, yeah, we've worked with the fire department quite a bit, and I think so the fire department has what you're referring to are the running lanes. They have specific routes that they utilize to go from their fire stations to specific locations, and those are routes that I think are perhaps easiest for them or closest to the station, just make most sense. So we do work with them to, if we are proposing an improvement on those locations, I think there's a heightened sensitivity about that. One of the benefits of the speed cushions, however, is that it does provide an opening for fire apparatus. So it might be something that they're more open to. That is, we are in the process of working on the neighborhood traffic management program update. And in that, I think we're also looking at updating the roadways that we can allow traffic control devices on. So while the running lanes themselves may be a little bit more of a difficult conversation because fire uses those specifically, we are looking at opening it up to other collector roadways and primarily collector roadways that were not previously allowed.
Any rough idea when that may come before the commission and management plan?
Ideally in the next year.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Thank you for your report. Traffic action plan came about, and when it did, it's really changed a lot of things. I'm going to give you an example of something that isn't in part of it, but the El Camino 92 intersection has changed it so dramatically where it was backed up on 92 all the time, and it was scary and traffic accidents almost all the time where people are swinging off the freeway. And now it works so smoothly. But I'll give you an example. Yesterday, the El Camino light was out at 17th. I had to go over just to get some medicine real quick, and I thought it would take me 5 minutes to get over there, which is normal. It took me 45 minutes just to get through because the traffic was backed up almost to 101 on 92, just for people going to El Camino that were trying to go north and stop in the traffic. So these traffic action things really work, but I still think what we need is highest priority as a city for the biggest events that we need. I mean, a lot of the small hanging fruit things that have gotten done are great, but we still need to give the older neighborhoods higher priority than the newer neighborhoods who have some ongoing issues, even though we're trying to appease everybody. we still need to give that look at like our last meeting where some of the neighborhoods came in and said, hey, what about us? Thank you for Bay Meadows for standing up and having all these newer issues, but we've been here on the table waiting a long time to get finished, and I agree with that. So we have a high need for that, and we need to keep working on it because you have so many neighborhoods that have little things that irritate them and they're happy and they're fixed, and all the complaints that people have said over the years for speeding and stuff, the police are working on it, they're fixing it, they've given them attention, which is the number one thing that this has done. It's gotten neighborhood attention, and it makes people feel like they're getting some reward back instead of just seeing something happen bad. So I want to say thank you for all the work that Public Works has done because it's been a ton of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. I'm going to go through some questions, and then I'm going to circle back on what my fellow commissioners said, but or comments that they have both brought up, which I think are poignant. So I want to go to Glendale Village and talk a little bit about them. You know, Public Works did a great job relocating the crosswalk from the east to the west side, and then but now we no longer have the photo sensing device in place. It's no longer operable. And I, by the way, travel Hillsdale probably twice a day. So I see a lot. And so what I'm observing without the photo sensing is what I call rolling stops. And if we look at, particularly as we're getting off of Saratoga, I mean, you know, we're getting off of 101, we're probably heading north. We are heading north, so south. And we get off onto Saratoga, and then we make a right onto Hillsdale. Well, what I see now is rolling, what I call rolling stops, if that's the correct term. And so people are just rolling right over the crosswalk that is on Saratoga, and likewise rolling right over the crosswalk that was just relocated. And so the question is, my understanding is the photo sensing equipment's not going to be put back into operation. Is there anything that we could discuss in terms of pedestrian safety? Because I really feel now the pedestrians, because I see it, they've got to fight for their crosswalk. And you know, the reality is when people get off of Saratoga making a right onto Hillsdale, they're looking actually east. They're not even looking at the pedestrians that are trying to cross. So what are some thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and thanks for asking that. We had a project at the Hillsdale-Saratoga intersection, and it was intended to provide optimization to the signal. So that included the relocation of the pedestrian crosswalk to the other side of the intersection, but it also included implementation of a new signal feature that would allow for that southbound right turn from Saratoga to flow a little bit better onto Hillsdale. With that, we had a paving project that came through, and we decided to separate the project into two phases. So the pedestrian crossing got relocated with the paving project, and we have a second phase of the project that's coming through that we're at 100% design, and we're just working on getting some encroachment permits through Caltrans for it, and we'll be working on constructing it. But in that design, we have included some improvements to the signal that are different. Actually, they haven't been implemented here in the city yet, or I don't think even in the county, that will install a flashing yellow arrow when pedestrians are at the intersection. So it's going to be for the southbound right turn specifically. And what that will do is just bring attention to drivers and motorists that there is a pedestrian that is there that they need to yield to. So it's following the installation of the crosswalk, we did install some additional signage to yield to pedestrians in those locations. Right. However, this is intended to enhance that notification to yield even further.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Could you, this is something I thought of, could you just put a no right-hand, basically prohibit right-hand turns from Saratoga onto Hillsdale?
I'm not sure that looking at the optimization of the intersection, I think Hillsdale is a location that we would prefer that motorists be on, so I'm not sure that if we restrict the right turns, where they would go, if we would want that to be the routes that they go on. So one of the alternatives would be to stay on Franklin, to drive down Delaware, really because Hillsdale is an arterial, it's intended to carry that volume. However, I think the enhancement altogether that we're proposing will provide an additional level of safety for the pedestrians that are in those crosswalks. It'll allow motorists to know that they're there a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, here's another thing I've seen too, is gates that go down to protect the pedestrians from the rolling stops. And once again, everybody's looking east, but the pedestrians are west. Anyway, that's something that I'm sensitive to because I see it way too often. Let me kind of move on to some of my other questions here, but I think it's something that we at the city needs to address as it relates to pedestrian safety. What is the status of the traffic studies along Hillsdale between Curtis and South Norfolk? Once again, that is peppered all through Glendale Village's NTAP.
So the purpose of that study was to really identify some of the bottleneck along the corridor, and the results of that study identified the section of Hillsdale between Norfolk and the northbound 101 ramps as being one of the biggest bottlenecks on the corridor. And the purpose of that was to provide some recommendations for measures to improve traffic flow through that area.
Right.
So with those recommendations, we have included some of the, we've included a widening component at the for eastbound Hillsdale approaching the 101 northbound ramps in another grant-funded project that we're working on with Foster City and the TA, and that one's the 10192 short-term projects. I believe it was in the paper just recently the other day, but in that we're looking to widen Hillsdale in that area to enhance and remove the bottleneck.
Right. Okay. So you're saying these studies were completed. I think they're showing that they're still open. I'm just looking at the summary, the matrix that you gave me.
Okay.
And that's the purpose of my question there.
Sure.
Is what is the status of this? And they're pretty important traffic studies. And that's a pretty congested area.
Yeah, definitely. So oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, you're saying those are still in process.
The study itself has already identified the improvements that are needed, but the work itself has not been completed.
Okay, all righty. I might follow up with you to get that, because I was talking to some of the folks from Glendale Village who were unable to attend tonight, and I mentioned I would be speaking on their behalf. Okay, let me ask you another question here. In the summary, I see the city was awarded a grant to improve signal timing along the El Camino corridor, including signals close to the corridor through the entire city limits. Has the signal timing work been done, or, okay, it has been completed?
Yeah, that work, we received a grant through MTC to provide, and actually they held the contract with the consultant to provide new signal timing along the entirety of El Camino throughout the city. And yes, that work has been completed.
Okay.
However, we do have funding for ongoing efforts to coordinate traffic signals, and that's still something that we look at. So some of those efforts included coordinating with Caltrans to improve some timing on Hillsdale. So, but again, a lot of those efforts are ongoing.
Okay, all right, but anyway, the grant has been secured, the timing has been throughout the entire El Camino corridor in the city of San Mateo, and then hopefully, as you said, you're trying to work on some adjacent signals that feed into El Camino. All righty. Let's see, several of the action items included the portable radar board. And my question is, how many do we own? And what are the decisions in terms of location? How is that prioritized or determined? Where in the city do these boards go? How many do we have? And how long do they stay there? And who determines where they go next?
So I'll begin to answer that, and if Shannon isn't satisfied with that, he can perhaps provide some additional information. So we have 3 boards total. 2 of those are dedicated to traffic action plan items, and those just locations that were specified in the traffic action plans. And one of those is provided for just additional locations. So we receive a number of speed concerns throughout the city, and anything that's not on the traffic action plan list would be addressed with the additional radar trailer that we have. So we have a total of 3 of them. So perhaps Shannon, can you?
I will just add that each TAP neighborhood has specific areas of concern, and some neighborhoods have more streets that would like to have the radar trailer out more often. So in those TAP neighborhoods, the radar trailers will be maybe a week at that one location, where in some neighborhoods, there's more time to leave them, so we'll leave them there for a whole month.
Right, so it varies based on neighborhood to neighborhood.
And there's a set schedule where, based on the tabs, I don't have the schedule with me, but it's just a routine rotation through all the different tabs. So everybody
Okay.
gets equal share of the trailers that we have.
Right, so we have the three radar screens, 2 dedicated to TAP, and you just said any of the neighborhoods that have this action item, it will just be rotated through unless circumstances dictate otherwise.
Exactly.
Okay,
And then we have the big messaging boards that have signs that have radar on them as well.
right.
Well, sometimes we'll put those out in areas where we want to capture the data without the community knowing that we're doing it. Because when you have the speed feedback, people are sometimes, we're hoping they slow down, and residents are telling us that's the case. But sometimes we want to check out what's actually happening, so we'll put our big signs out there.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Let's see, in several of the neighborhoods, there was an action item, conducting speed surveys, volume counts, and review collision history for a year, in several of them. Any sense when the studies will be completed?
So we started collecting data for about 25% of those.
Okay.
We have a number of them that we need to get back to. We are currently in the process of finalizing a contract with an on-call traffic counts consultant, and I think looking at the time frame, the usual time frame that we collect traffic counts, we probably won't be able to get any more of those this year with that consultant. So I think we're going to be looking to spring to collect all the remaining items that require traffic counts, and then the analysis will probably be done through the summer and finalized in the fall.
Okay. Yeah, so because what you have to do is you have to collect data. It looks like you collect it for a year, or no, no.
We don't collect it for a full year. We usually just take a snapshot, which is a day or a week representation.
Right, right. And then you'll review collision history for a year, and that will then be consolidated in a final report that will be presented to the steering committee, to the neighborhood, the commission, and, just think about the presentation, because there's several of them, several neighborhoods on here. It's a pretty common action item.
So a lot of those action items came following initial studies that we did. So those were usually follow-up studies. And I think we can talk about how best to get that information back out to the neighborhoods.
Okay, all righty. Okay, so we're probably looking at, like you said, about a year from now. Okay, all righty. Just a few more questions here. Also, several neighborhoods had a very common action item. That is, the city is in the process of reviewing and updating the NTAP to potentially allow Step 2 devices in residential collector streets. What's the status on that analysis or that review?
So just a quick note on that. One of the first things that we did do for a lot of those locations where speeding was identified as a concern was we identified those locations for the permanent speed feedback signs. So those were really some of the main implementations that we did for those locations. However, we are looking at the neighborhood traffic action plan and traffic management program to update that. And one of the big things that we want to do is sort of revamp it and make it a little bit more streamlined. Right now, the document is a little bit comprehensive. And while that's good, we want to make it a little bit easier for residents to be able to get traffic calming measures completed on their roadways. So that includes perhaps looking at the thresholds that we have defined right now to see if those need to be lowered to be able to meet the concerns of other community or more community members, and also just streamlining the process. That's one of the big things that the current program makes a little bit cumbersome, and that we would want to look into to see if we can just make that process a lot faster.
Sure. So are you saying that there is a possibility of having step 2 devices on residential collector streets, and that there is going to be a more straightforward mechanism for someone to request that?
Not necessarily request them. I mean, the request, I think the request process is fairly easy. It's really the analysis and the way that we go through our process of approving those. So right now, it entails a fairly lengthy process of requiring a large neighborhood meeting, requiring a petition, requiring coming back to the commission, things like that. And I think we're wanting to reevaluate whether some of those steps are still necessary. So that way, we can perhaps get them out there a lot faster.
Right. So what I hear you saying, there's a possibility, but there's a very long process. And the question is that's if I'm following you.
Yes, yeah. There's still a qualification that we need to do. We want to make sure that we're implementing these measures based on data that we're collecting to show that there's a concern, that the concern is validated. But once that happens, we want to make the process as easy and streamlined as possible to get measures in to start addressing those problems.
Sure. Do people know that, what you've just said? I don't know. I don't think a lot of people know that there is a possibility for a step 2 device on a residential collector street, just talking to people.
I'm not sure that they know it.
Yeah. And the fact that the city's trying to, obviously it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, definitely. And again, when we go through and revise the program, that's something that we'll include in there. I think we're going to have to look at a lot of our collectors to make sure that, again, we're addressing the residential collectors and not necessarily some of the more major collector roadways.
Yeah, it's not going to be all residential collectors, but there could be some residential collectors, which then brings me, and this is my last, actually this is really more a comment than I'm done, to what a point that Commissioner Robbins had brought up, is emergency routes. And the possibility of also including them in, that is the routes in receiving traffic calming mechanisms or devices as well. And maybe once again, following that protocol, identifying some streets or parts of a street that could get traffic calming in the emergency routes. You know, the emergency routes, by the way, cars drive fast. The emergency routes are typical wider streets. They might be straighter streets. I live on one. I know it really well. And so, having some of the emergency routes be considered for traffic calming and following some sort of process could be something worth considering.
I think that, if I may, I think that would involve just working with the fire department again. So a lot of it is related to response times from the various fire stations that they have. So I think we would really want to work with them very closely to identify if any of those routes can then be included, because those response times are really a requirement that they have to meet. So I think that's a conversation that we can have with them.
Yeah, and we have spoken, and I see, Brad, you want to, let me just finish up on one point here. We have spoken with some, in our neighborhood, with some of the fire department people, and they seem to be very open to that. I'll just leave it at that.
So Bethany made the comment. Essentially, those routes are, if you will, the artery for the fire department to get into the neighborhoods, because then they've got to hit smaller streets, right? So if we slow them down on those routes, their times to get to, their response times get longer, and I think they have a goal that they want to achieve. So that's why we have to have those discussions with the fire department.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not negating that discussion. Our neighborhood has had discussions with them. Yeah, we've talked to them about this when it became part of a conversation early in NTAP about what if anything can be done on emergency routes without impeding their response time. Okay. I think we're just about wrapped up. Any other comments from the public? Drew, Lori?
No, I have nothing.
And you have no speaker slips. Oh. Oh, Lori, you don't have to fill out a speaker slip. It's not necessary. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here and finish off with any announcements, events?
Thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, thank you, yes, yep. Announcements?
Yeah, so I have next month, the citywide bicycle master plan will be back to you all. We actually presented that at a study session at council on Monday, which went very well. We also have the sewer lateral program annual update. So we did an annual report to the commission last year. So we're going to continue that on an annual basis to let you know how that program's doing. And then we also have the sewer lateral ordinance discussion, as we have previously talked to you about updating that ordinance. And so we're working on that and getting that closer to being completed. I also want to comment from Commissioner Rowanski, your email earlier today is an item we'll put on the not yet scheduled is the waste diversion item, and the SB 1383 item. We'll combine that into one and bring that to you sometime early in the year next year. A bit of good news, we're making progress on our UFIS, the underground flow equalization system that I know you all are aware of. It was approved by the Planning Commission a week or two ago, and it'll be at the council meeting on the 21st. So we're very excited to see the environmental document get finalized on that, and that will move forward with that project.
Yep. Commissioner Sinclair?
I just got to say that I thank God that we're lucky that 2 years ago with the fire up north, we don't have that kind of thing. I'm lucky that we don't have the dealings with PG&E and all of what's going around the whole Bay Area tonight and the next couple nights. I think the city, and again, I brought it up at other meetings, I think somehow the city, Public Works, when we have new buildings coming in, we have to look at space for Uber and drop-offs more, because we have existing buildings now that are recent in the last couple of years, and the Uber drivers are just stopping even on the thoroughfares and the busy streets are stopping to pick up people on the corners, blocking traffic. And we have spaces, I've seen a half a dozen spots where we have spaces where there could be 2-3 car pull-ins and pull-outs, but we don't do it. And it's something that is, because it's so new and developing, that we need to get on to planning that every building has something like that, if this is going to be the wave of the future. And like I always say, something for public. Everybody hug a cop. Who are you going to call if you need a problem? You call a cop. They show up. They're always there for you to help. So everybody should hug them.
Okay. Hug your cop day. I do have, this is our opportunity to also request future agenda items, and Brad and Roxanne, thanks for making sure that we do bring in South Bayside Waste Management Authority. It's what they're doing in terms of recycling and our ability to sell overseas is really crucial. But I would like to also have added to our agenda sometime in the first half of 2020 is what I kind of call Public Works, really the kind of nuts and bolts of what you folks do. And in addition, because I think there's some stories here, I would like to see a presentation as it relates to, maintaining, what is the maintenance plans for curb painting? And street signage, such as crosswalks and street parking lines, and it'd be interesting to see what the city or what Public Works plans, what your maintenance plans are, particularly for commercial areas outside of downtown. I wouldn't want to eliminate downtown, but also commercial areas outside of downtown. And this is kind of the nuts and bolts of what Public Works does, and it's actually quite visible to the public. It's not terribly sexy stuff, but it's very visible to the public, and it's something that I hear from people in terms of signage and the condition of curbs. I'd also think, and I think Public Works has a story to tell here in terms of replacement of the faded street signs throughout the city. There's a plan in place, I know that, and I think the public should know about that, and I think it's a great plan. So I'd like to see if we could get that on the agenda sometime the first half of 2020. Thank you. Any other further questions, comments? No? Okay.